Welcome to this video, which it shows me making a 3/4 size top hat, and the pattern I have made is available from my shop, shmillinery.etsy.com. Please bear in mind that this pattern is not an exact pattern because there are variables to do with your fabric, etc. You will need a piece of buckram, 24 inches by 18 approximately, to cut the pattern out from. If you purchase the pattern, you'll find instructions on how to put the pattern pieces together. You should have a top, a crown in 3 pieces that have to be joined together, and a brim. Now I'm marking them all on the buckram with pen because it's easier for all of you to see. So that just shows here. And I've written the size in the middle there, 24 inches by 18. I have rejigged the pattern slightly since I did the video because obviously once you start making it, you find things that need altering. So bear in mind that your pattern may look slightly different. I'm marking all the cut lines as well on the crown. Once all the pieces are cut out, I'm then going to cut out the middle section, the very middle section of the brim. This will be laid onto the brim, and I then mark that middle section so that I can cut it out. You only need 1 layer of buckram for each of these pieces. Once they're wired, they will become more sturdy. So here I am marking the centre line. Don't worry about the other line, we'll come to that a bit later on. To cut this, I cut a hole in the centre, then I cut a V, which makes it easier to cut round a circle or an oval. So once I've cut this section out, we will roughly have our brim. As I say, there are a lot of variables in this. It depends on the thickness of your fabric. It depends on whether you decide to line the fabric. So please bear in mind that there are differences when you make this hat. Now we have all our pieces cut out. And we have the crown, as you can see, with all the cut lines marked. And what I'm going to do is cut down these in a straight line to approximately halfway down the crown. You can see here, approximately halfway down. Doesn't have to be totally exact, but if you can keep it reasonably, you can mark it obviously, but I felt it was just easy enough to do it by eye. If you're confident enough, you can do it by eye. Now we'll be using glue in this because I've done measure your brim reed or your wire, decide how big, join it together. Now I always join my brim reed with sellotape. It doesn't need anything fancy, it doesn't need stitching, you can just join it together with sellotape. So I join it with sellotape, I check it again. Because it's sellotaped, I can push it slightly through the sellotape to readjust the size. Make sure it's as near as possible to the size of the top. Now I'm taking the brim reed that I've just made and I'm attaching it to the top of the crown. And you can see I've glued it together, and now I'm attaching all the cut marks. What you're trying to do is get an even gap between each cut mark. So it's best to do north, south, east, west first, and then peg or pin, whichever way you like, all your other cut marks. So there should be a little V in between so that you're splaying out the top of the hat. So as you can see there. Now what we'll need to do is we'll need to attach that wire to the buckram. So I'm going to sew that wire onto the buckram. And you can see I've sewn it here. Now we're going to use the offcuts of buckram that we had to fill in those gaps, those triangular gaps. So I've cut lots of triangles of buckram, which I'm now going to glue in position. Now, just to tell you that this section of the tutorial took me over half an hour to do. This hat is a long-winded process and will take a long time, many hours. So I've glued the sections and then I put them over the inside. You can put them over the outside, but it's harder to get them into place. So it's easier if you do it on the inside. You can see what you're doing better. If your triangles aren't quite straight at the top, just snip, snip. But all the spare that you had from cutting out the pattern will be used for these triangles. And again, glue, glue, glue. Now, it really depends what glue you use as to what you like. If you have a preference for a particular glue, I know different countries use different glues. This glue is by High Tack and it's called Fast Tack. I'll show you a bit later on in the tutorial. But what I like about this is also it heat bonds with fabrics. So although I'm taking a while to get it going here, I can run the iron over it and it will heat bond it and make it a really permanent fix. So it's my go-to glue at the moment. I like this and Fabri-Tac. Glue is so wonderful. So you go on putting your triangles in to fill all the gaps to make the hat sturdy and not have any holes in. As I say, it takes a while to do because there are a lot of little gaps now. When I did this pattern, I made the crown quite high, and since doing the video, I've realised it needed shortening just a fraction. So the pattern, if you purchase the pattern from my Etsy shop, you will find it slightly shorter than what you're seeing made here. But the end hat that you see and the one at the beginning of the video are the size that it is now. You get a bit mucky, but this glue does wash off before it's totally dry. You can wash it off your hands. Once you've heat sealed it, you've got no chance on the fabric. It's stuck there forever. It's pretty good glue. So once all your oh, there's my glue, Fast Tack, made by High Tack. So I've glued triangles. Oh, there you are. There, I show it. Ah, I'm nice like that. Once you've glued all your triangles to the top, your crown of the hat is almost ready. But now you need to just put something over the edge. So I'm just using white bias binding, stretch as you pull. As you know, with bias you need to stretch it so it goes around the curves. So I'm going all the way around and then I'll stitch that in place with the machine. Or of course you can hand stitch, but this hat does take a lot of work, so if you can machine stitch I would. Right, now I'm going to cover it. This is with a wadding. You don't need to do this, but I feel I'm going to. And depends what fabric you use. So with this, I'm using some flannelette cotton. I tend to buy cheap sheets from local haberdashers and home bargain type shops. And I use that. So what you need to do is measure along and cut on the bias, cut a big triangle, because although you think you might cut the right size, when you start putting it on, it's very awkward because you've really got to stretch. So this is flannelette and I'm using this with my base fabric. So you start stretching it and pulling it with the bias so that you can pull it into shape all over. This, again, takes a while to do so that you've got a nice finish. And what you'll need to do at the end of it is trim all your edges. As you can see, have it all neat and tidy, and trim off any excess. This type of hat is not easy to give an exact measurement of fabric because, again, it depends on the fabric, it depends on the bias, depends on the stretch. So you really have to use your common sense. So then what I'll do is trim all the excess off on the top. That can be used for another project. And trim the excess off the bottom. Now I'm going to glue this again. You can stitch if you want, but I recommend gluing it. So I'm gluing the fabric down on both sides, as you can see. So it's now covered. So you could use quite a lightweight fabric on it now because it has a nice smooth finish. The next thing you'll need to do is wire the brim. Now this does have to be wire because you need to be able to bend it to give the shape to the brim. You can't use plastic reed for this. You do need brim wire. Now, excuse the fact I'm using black, and you'll see a lot of odd colours coming into the fore here, but it's because I'm low on supplies at the moment, so I'm using up what I've got. So you need a brim wire all the way around the edge. I don't use joiners. I just overlap the brim wire by 1 inch either side, and I make sure it's all sewn down securely. I've found that connectors don't fit all the wires that I have, and they often just fall apart. So I prefer to stitch it in place. Right, so stitch your wire all the way around the edge of the brim, which is done. And we're now going to cover that again with some bias, just to give a neat finish and you haven't got any lumpy edges. And again, I'm using white bias because I've got a lot of it. I am thinking of setting up a section in my shop for supplies because I often mention things and I think, oh, I wonder if people can get them. So let me know if you'd be interested. So I'm going to go around, stretch the bias as you go so that it fits snugly, and stitch that in place. And again, I'm using the machine for this. Most of my videos and tutorials are aimed at people who already sew and are milliners, so they'll understand a lot of the technique involved. But if you're not too sure, just give me a shout, ask me a question, always happy to help. So I'm going to stitch that with the machine. Now I want the fabric, the main fabric for the body, and I'm using a fake fur sort of velvety fabric that I got an offcut, an odd sample of, and I think it'd be brilliant for this. So again, I've cut a huge triangle on the bias so that I can use that to go around the hat. Now, this took me about 20 minutes to get this totally adjusted and correct. So bear in mind, this is quite an intensive hat to make because you're continually stretching, pulling, getting it just right so that you don't deform the shape of the buckram. Once you've got it the shape you want and it's all covered, again, cut off your excess. And you'd be surprised, there's not that much of it really. And again, I'm going to glue this, and the reason is this fabric just frays like mad, you can see. The fur just comes off. So I'm going to glue both edges down onto the inside and also the seam area. So that's what I'm going to do now. Now we come to the top. So we need a piece of the fur for that, and I just realised when I put that down it wasn't big enough, so I had to get a bigger piece, because you need an edge so that you can fold it over and glue. So take your top, do about 1 inch all the way round extra, cut that out. Thing about this hat is you could cover it with anything. You could have just covered it with the winceyette if you wanted. So this is why it's not an exact pattern, because every time you use a different fabric, the widths are different, which will lead to differences in sizes. So you do have to do quite a lot of adjustment while you're making something like this. It's not as easy as making a blocked top hat. And again, I'm going to glue. So I'm going to squeeze a lot of glue all the way around the fabric. And I do like this glue, it sets fast. And as I say, if you weren't using a fur felt like this, you could heat bond it and make it even more secure. But I've found that it's very hard to get apart if you've already glued it. So yeah, I've speeded myself up so you can see what's going on. When I make the patterns, they take me about 10 hours. And then when I make the hats for the video, I can see where the pattern's not quite right. So I adjust the pattern. So when you get the pattern, you've had the full force of me trying it out. Right, so the top's glued. Now we need to cover the brim. Now I folded the fabric in half. You don't need any extra over the edge. You just need as big as the brim, because we're not making any seams or anything like that. So pin and mark the centre hole, the very centre hole that you have on your brim. Once you've cut it out and you've taken all the pins out, we are going to, again, glue this, because otherwise you would have to stitch all over the fabric, so that when you folded the brim or moved the brim, the fabric didn't go in another direction to the brim. So you've got to glue this. There isn't really a way around it unless you want to stitch hundreds of rows around. So I put my first piece on and adjust it so that it's nice and smooth and a good fit. Then I'm going to weight it down so that it dries well. And then once it's dry, I'll turn it over and I'll put the other side on, as you can see here. I think you can probably tell from this video, this is why top hats are a lot of money, whether they're blocked or flat patterned like this. This is a lot of work. I'm only warning you, because if you want to do this, you've got to have a minimum of about 20 hours to make it, especially if you haven't made hats before. Right, so both sides have been covered in fabric. And once they're covered and it's all sturdy, what you need to do is trim the edges as close to your bias binding as possible. Try not to cut through that. So you want to trim the edges so they're as close to the brim as possible. So go around and just trim excess fabric off. Then what I've done is I've gone over the edges with a zigzag stitch just to neaten it all up on the edges and secure everything. Now you've got to decide how you want to edge the brim. Obviously you can use Petersham, you can use bias binding, but I decided to use some satin binding, which I sewed by hand. So the brim is ready for us to think about putting the crown on. So what I'm now going to do is take my pattern again and cut the other circle out. Now the good thing is, if you buy this pattern from my shop, you can download it as many times or print it out as many times as you like, so you don't have to worry that you're destroying it each time. Also, I'll give instruction at the end how to reduce it. If you want to make it very small, more like a party top hat, I'll tell you how to do that at the end. Now try and get your brim on your paper brim on the brim really well so it fits around all sides. Now this is not very easy, and I started doing it. I must have got the middle hung out a bit wonky, but it doesn't matter because, as I say, you'll need to adjust a lot when you make this hat because depending on what you use. The fabric I've used is very thick. And remember, I've got 3 layers now, 2 layers of fabric and a layer of buckram. If I feel I haven't got it right, I can brush it off because it's chalk, because I need to measure either side, and if those sides don't match, again, do it again. I'm trying with a pencil now. Not that I think that makes an awful lot of difference whether it was a tailor's chalk or a pencil chalk. Just fiddly, and not very easy when you're trying to video it. Probably easier if I wasn't trying to video it. Anyway, we have a rough mark of where we want to make some cut lines. Now this is where it gets difficult. Do not cut right to the outer line. Just do north, south, east, west, and make some short cuts. Because when you try and put the crown on, you'll find that you need to adjust those cuts. Some you'll need to make longer, some you'll need to make shorter. And again, this is because I have no way of knowing what fabric you're going to be using and what size you're going to be making the hat. So it's all a bit suck it and see, as they say. But once you've made your initial cuts, you can see that it's going to bend up. That's good. And then we'll attach the crown to it. So what we do is put the crown in place, and then we'll need to measure all sides. We'll need to measure back, front, both sides. We'll have to pin and then stitch your north and south, and do a rough stitch on your east, west, etc. Remeasure. This takes quite a long while to do, to remeasure it, get it all exact. But once you feel everything's in place, you've put some tacking stitches in, you should be able to stitch it. Now, before you do anything else, before you stitch it in place, it's a good idea to work out your lining, because you'll have to make the lining in exactly the same way as you cut the fabric and the covering. You need to cut a large triangle. You place it inside the hat, work out exactly where it's going to fit, where you're going to stitch it, make a seam in it, where you're going to cut off the excess, and then you're going to sew a top to it. So do that before you do anything else, because once the crown and the brim are stitched together, you've got no opportunity really of measuring. So measure that and cut, and you've got it roughly in place, ready to insert in the hat. Right, so we've pinned, we've stretched, we've snipped more cuts. Make sure you've snipped your cuts enough that they'll fit, but not too much that you've gone outside of the crown. Keep measuring, keep pinning. This does take quite a long while, but as I say, if you stitch at each 4 north, south, east, west points and then work your way from there, you'll be able to see where you may need to make your cuts deeper and where you need to move your brim. And once you've decided it's equidistant and all looks good, you can stitch in place. So you'll stitch through the crown and then through your cut sections with extra strong thread. So yeah, so I'm stitching through. Now the good thing about this fabric was I didn't have to be particularly careful with doing teeny tiny stitches that didn't show, because they just didn't show once I'd stitched through this fabric. But obviously whatever fabric you're using, you will stitch accordingly. So try and stitch all your flappy cut bits down to your crown and make it all secure. So that's stitched together now, and now we've got to concentrate on the top. And you can see I've bent the wire up either side just to show you the effect that we're getting. So your covered brim, I'll take all my clips off. That's all glued and secure. I called it a brim and it's a top, isn't it? It's been a long day. Right, pop that on the top. Put a couple of pins in so that you're happy with it. Again, north, south, east, west before you do anything else. And then you are going to stitch those together. Again, with this fabric, I didn't have to be too mindful of doing teeny tiny stitches, but normally you do have to because you'll see it. So I've got it pinned north, south, east and west. Oh, just to show you, I'm cutting out the top for my lining, and it's exactly the same size as the top for the top hat. So my lining will be sewn in. I will also sew a sweatband in, and then I'll decorate it. Now, as I say, this is a 3/4 size hat. If you want to make it smaller, you want to make it more of a cocktail size, all you have to do is reduce the pattern by however much you want to. If you reduce it by 50% when you print it, you'll have a little tiny sort of cocktaily type hat, and you can make that in any shape or form you like. So that's it really. Line it, add your petersham, add your trim. Now, because it's quite a large hat for something that doesn't fit a head size, you will need to work out how it wants to fix to the head. And I've put elastic in mine because it is quite heavy. And you may want to add elastic or a hairband or pin holders, whatever you want. But it was fun to work out. It was a long-winded process to work out the pattern, the best way to make it. But I hope you've enjoyed it and have fun making. Do follow my channel and subscribe. Look me up on Etsy or Facebook or Instagram. I'm across the board and I love making and I love showing you how to make too. Thank you very much for watching.